guys, so this week I'll be taking a look at the last of my personal collection of the 7-inch NECA special releases that was scaled down from the 1/4 or 18-inch scale line to the 7-inch line. Sadly, there was usually just one character from each film or game or whatever it happened to be that was released, and any other characters that were produced in the quarter scale were not produced in this 7-inch scale. So these characters, these figures tend to stand pretty lonely by themselves and can make for an interesting but fairly disjointed collection of 7-inch action figures. But that said, they are some fantastic figures, so I'm really pleased to have them in my collection. So I'm going to look at the last one today, which is the Batman Begins figure, and at the end I will look at the other two releases that I personally didn't pick up, but you might be interested in knowing about. So starting with the packaging, we can see they've kept the theme or the branding from 2005 when Batman Begins was released in cinemas. This is a really cool touch. I really like that they've gone for this approach. It works very nicely and is quite nostalgic actually now. So yeah, we can see obviously the Batman at the bottom of the packaging there. We can see the sort of the yellow and the black and the bats in the cityscape behind him, and of course we have this window display showing the figure off in all of his glory. Interestingly, on the side panel, NECA have broken from tradition here and actually put an image of the figure itself in a really dynamic pose. I really like this approach. They've kept the theme of the Batman Begins sorts of style and approach and design, which works really well, but they've put this photo in here. I like this because this means you could stack these figures up on your shelf and have different characters appear in there, and it's a nice way to stack them but still be visually very presentable. Now sadly they didn't do this with the other figures. If you look at say the Superman 78 or the Joker that I looked at last week, you can see that they're pretty bland. They don't really have an image like this, and I think it would have been really cool if it'd been consistent and you could have had each of these different characters lined up like this. So I really like this approach. It's just a shame they didn't do it for the other figures in this line. And then finally on the reverse we have this fantastic image of the figure. Again, we have the sort of Gotham City scape in the background there, and of course that wonderful golden light in there, which I think works really very nicely. We have a little bit of text about the character, which is cool, and this is very reminiscent of their approach to the Superman 78 packaging, if you remember that. It looks very similar, and once again I suspect they've taken a photo of the quarter scale version of this figure. There's a little bit more detail, the paint apps are ever so slightly different than what we get in this 7-inch figure. And speaking of the figure, I have to say this is really cool. This might be my favourite of all of these ones that I've looked at so far over the last few weeks. I think he's really nicely done. He looks pretty pitch perfect really. Now, I do really like the sculpting on this figure. I'm less impressed by the paint apps on the face, and particularly in the eyes. It's my only real gripe with this figure, because otherwise I think it's pretty wonderful. So in terms of sculpting, yes, I think it's a very good likeness of the Christian Bale Batman. I think this looks really good. If you compare these two images here, yeah, you can see that this is perfectly proportioned to be this specific version of Batman. I think it looks really good. The only misfire really, as we can see here, is the eyes, and the pupil on each eye is in a different direction. So one is looking down, one is looking up, so he's very cross-eyed, which isn't great. And also they look quite bloodshot as well. The actual whites of the eyes there look quite pink. So unfortunately this does really distract from this figure for me. Maybe I've just been very unlucky, and it's a real shame, because otherwise the rest of the figure, as we'll see, is really very nice. I really love the sculpting here, and I have to give the sculptors top marks for the fantastic job they've done of the body armour in particular. It looks really good, very authentic to what we see on screen, and I like how there's a different tone in the plastics that they've used as well. So for the gauntlets we have this sort of glossy kind of paint, which makes those gauntlets stand out a little bit more, and they look like a different material, different texture to the rest of the body armour, which is really cool. And in particular, of course, we have this belt as well, which is great. This contrast between this black and the gold works so well, and I love that there's a number of different paint washes and a number of different paint apps on this belt. We can see silver in there, we can see gold, we can see a bit of a black wash running through it. Makes it look textured, detailed, and lived in and real, and it just looks really good. So I really like this. I think they've done a tremendous job here. Likewise, if we look at the legs, and in particular these boots, again we can see they've used different plastics here to give it a glossy effect, to help those boots really stand out a little bit more, and it really differentiates between the different textures on this costume, which is a really nice touch. The other thing I really love about this figure is that the detailing goes all the way to the soles of the feet. If we lift up the soles here, we can see there's a really thick tread on this boot, which is a lovely bit of attention to detail. Now, the real star of the show, though, has to be the cape. I love the material they've used. It's a very thick cotton, but it works so well. You can have it draped around him so it cloaks him fully, or you can have it over his shoulder, and it looks fantastic. No matter what you do with it, this looks perfectly in proportion, and it just looks very authentic to what we see on screen. So I really love what they've done with this, and it works so well. That contrast, again, between materials that they've used just is very, very effective. So in terms of articulation, he does have a ball joint in the neck, so he can kind of turn his head from side to side and wobble it forwards and backwards a little bit. I'm not too worried about the restrictive nature of this, because in the movie, he can't really move his head. I mean, that's one of the jokes of the series, is that he has real trouble with this particular costume. So that actually works for me, no problem. Now, he does have ball joints in the shoulders. These are a little bit stiff and don't give you as much range as I might like, to be honest. He does have a pin swivel at the lower arm though, so he can spin that all the way around, and of course it will hinge to 90 degrees. He's then got one of those sort of sticky ball joint things that we have in the wrist that NECA used to like quite a bit, so he can rotate his wrist all the way around, and of course he can hinge it sort of forwards and backwards, but it's more of a wobble here and there. He does have this fantastic joint in his upper abs though, which is fantastic, so he can actually bend forwards and backwards, lean side to side, and spin from side to side, and it looks pretty convincing for the most part. So this is fantastic articulation. It works very, very nicely. Then he also has some ball joints in the legs, of course, so he can kick his hips out to the side. He's got another pin swivel at the lower leg, so he can move that all the way around or bend it to 90 degrees. Of course, those legs can kick forwards, they can kick backwards, and then there is finally ball joint at the ankle that will allow the foot to hinge forwards, backwards, and swivel from side to side. He also comes with some additional goodies and accessories as well, including an extra pair of closed fists, a golden batarang, a mini batarang that's on this sort of like clip, which is really very cool, and then he has his grappling gun as well. Now, for the batarang, there's a number of different options. He can hold it in his fist with the open gap there to slide the batarang into, so he can kind of hold it. It looks a little bit clumsy when it's like this, if he's gripping it in the fist like this, but that's one way you can display it. The other way is actually to do it in the other hand, which actually has a little gap between the fingers, which is way cool, because it looks like he's about to literally just throw this, and I think this looks really dramatic. And obviously, if you pose it like this, you can really see that this really perfectly encapsulates this version of the character that we see in the film. It's really authentic, and I just think it looks very, very cool on display. I love the grappling gun. I love this accessory just generally in the Batman universe. Doesn't matter which version of Batman has, I always think it looks really, really cool. But this version in particular is very, very nicely done. I love the two tones. I love the black against the gold. It just works so well. It's just brilliant. So this is very effective. It looks really, very nice. And of course, you can recreate that pose there of him being able to aim that up as if he's about to climb up a roof. It's brilliant. And for a quick scale comparison, here he is next to the Dark Knight Joker that we saw last week. Sadly, this is the closest we come to any kind of crossover between a sort of shared universe from being from the same sort of film series. Obviously, these two figures don't really belong together, because obviously this isn't the right Batman costume, but at least it is Christian Bale's Batman, and it's not hard to imagine these guys being pitched against each other. So I think this works really well, and they look pretty good next to each other on the shelf. But before I leave you today, I did want to mention a couple of other special releases from NECA, including the Batman 66. Again, this was scaled down from the quarter scale down to 7 inches. I'm not personally really much of a Batman 66 fan. I appreciate it for what it is, but it's not something I've ever really wanted to collect, so this is why it was a pass for me. But it looks nice enough as these figures go. Again, he feels a little bit lonely by himself, because there is no Robin or Joker or any of the other characters that you think of from that show, so it feels a little bit strange just having Adam West on his own with no other characters. But hey, I suppose beggars can't be choosers, and if you're a fan, you're probably very glad to have this in your collection. The other release was Harley Quinn from Arkham City. Again, a kind of a strange release, really, given that there's no other Arkham City characters, or even any other Arkham characters full stop from any of the computer games. So not on this scale anyway. So it's a real shame that we've only got the Harley Quinn, which again for me meant it was an easy pass, because I was collecting DC Direct line at the time. Although to be fair, this does look like it has a lot more articulation and some really fun accessories. So this is actually quite a nice looking figure. Maybe in hindsight I should have picked it up. But as it is, again, it seems odd to just have one character on their own from a line where there's no one else to really mix in with them. So it's a strange collection all in all, but a nice one, and it's just a real shame that they couldn't have expanded this line to include many other characters from each of these different versions of the Batman or DC universe. It would have been really cool to have had, say, a General Zod to accompany the Superman from 78, or perhaps even a Jack Nicholson Joker to accompany the Batman 89 figure, or even, hey, the Penguin from Batman Returns. That would have been pretty cool, or Catwoman, because they did do those in the quarter scale, but sadly it wasn't meant to be. But despite all that, this is a pretty nice collection of figures in their own right. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe as there'll be plenty more videos soon.